What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Draft Sharks YouTube channel. It's your boy Herms, here to be your host of another fantasy football vibe session. In this video, we are going to be breaking down my thoughts and feelings about the 49ers quarterback situation and the eventual camp battle that's going to take place between quarterbacks Brock Purdy and Trey Lance. Unlike the other videos that I've done in this series, I don't really have a stance either way. I've tweeted about each of these players plenty in the past, and I've offered some thoughts along the way, but frankly, I don't really have a rooting interest between Lance or Purdy at all. But I do know that this is a very hot-button issue in the fantasy football community at large, and also even into just the general NFL community. So let's dig in and talk about Brock Purdy, Trey Lance, what they've been doing, what they've been dealing with, and some of their stats, and all of the information that we can glean from what's happening. We finally reached a part of the NFL calendar where teams are putting their helmets back on and going back out into practice. The 49ers opened OTAs just a few days ago, and so far, Trey Lance has taken a huge portion of the first team reps in practice. In case you missed it, Lance spent a good portion of the offseason working with Chiefs quarterback Patrick Mahomes and private workout coach Jeff Christensen down in Texas. A lot of media folks pointed out how Trey Lance looked a lot better with his throwing mechanics and all sorts of other things after he went through this process. And now that he's further along in his post-ankle surgery life, there's a decent chance he could end up winning this starting job. But we can't forget about Brock Purdy, a guy that had to have elbow surgery after getting injured in the NFC Championship game against the Philadelphia Eagles. Purdy is set to resume throwing now that he's gotten far enough away from his surgery, and a few months ago, 49ers general manager John Lynch essentially came out and said, Purdy has the job. Granted, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but there have also been separate interviews with other 49ers players where they have lauded all of the things that Purdy brought to the table last year when he filled in at the end of the season. The other cloud hanging over this situation is the fact that the 49ers signed former top 5 overall NFL draft pick Sam Darnold to be part of this mix in camp as well. Because like I said before, both Purdy and Lance are coming off substantial injuries that caused them to miss a lot of time and have some pretty major surgeries. But I don't want to focus too much on Sam Darnold because his part of the equation may end up being, I don't know, maybe he's the starter for the first couple weeks of the year depending on what happens, but he's not the long-term guy here. Brock Purdy received 5 starts in the NFL regular season in 2022 and helped guide this 49ers team all the way to the NFC Championship. By no means was he a world beater during this stretch, but he was pretty good. Granted, it's pretty easy to be good when you have offensive weapons around you like running back Christian McCaffrey, wide receivers Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk, and all-pro tight end George Kittle, but at the same time, you still have to deliver the ball if you're tasked with being the quarterback. And Niners head coach Kyle Shanahan put together a pretty simple offensive system for Purdy to go out there and execute, which is exactly what he did. Among qualified quarterbacks who logged at least 50 dropbacks from Week 12 on, here's how Purdy ranks in some key offensive statistical categories. Purdy registered the 4th fewest air yards per game, ranked 17th in raw passing yards per game, and also only attempted 1.1 more passes per game than quarterback Kenny Pickett of the Steelers in that same time frame. But in that window, Purdy did lead all quarterbacks in touchdown percentage, ranked 6th in completion percentage, and 6th in on-target throw percentage, all while registering 18.2 fantasy points per game. All in all, Shanahan and the 49ers didn't ask the rookie to air it out necessarily, but he did have enough skills about him to be able to execute and deliver money throws and score touchdowns for that offense. As for Trey Lance, we've only seen about 5-ish games from him throughout his NFL career. Or I guess more like 4.5. And yes, in the interest of fairness, I am including that Week 1 game from last year against the Chicago Bears in which Lance had to endure torrential downpour and play in the middle of a monsoon. In each of those 5 games throughout his career where Lance has played substantial amount of time on the field, he ranks lower than Brock Purdy in every single one of those categories that I mentioned before. Touchdown rate, air yards per game, all of it, literally all of it. But the important thing to point out here is that Lance has an even smaller sample size of production than Brock Purdy does.
We don't have a lot to go off of for either of them.
But the thing that Lance can do that Purdy can't is run the ball. Trey Lance definitely has that Konami code going for him. In those 5 games, he's averaged 9.4 carries per game. All of that tracks with everything that we knew about Trey Lance when he was coming into the NFL. In his one full season as the starter at North Dakota State, he logged 1,100 rushing yards on 169 carries with 14 rushing touchdowns. So essentially what Shanahan, Lynch, and the rest of the 49ers organization has to figure out is, what way do you want to go? Do you want to go with the pocket guy that can execute the simple stuff? Or do you want to hand the reins over to the super athletic guy that can run around and make things happen for himself? And if we want to get into the weeds and talk about prospect pedigree and blah, 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 Purdy was a 4-year starter at Iowa State that never really showed much past a really awesome sophomore campaign, and a lot of people kind of just assumed would be a career NFL backup. And as for Lance, even though he was the 3rd overall pick in the NFL draft in 2021, he didn't play at a major Division I college, didn't really have more than that one season of being a full-time starter in college, and everybody knew he was going to have to sit and develop for a while anyway. So truthfully speaking, these guys are both somewhat of an enigma. But one common refrain that you'll hear from a lot of pro Trey Lance people is that he's the one with substantial draft capital invested in him. Yeah, it was expensive for GM John Lynch and the 49ers to move all the way up and pick Trey Lance in that draft.
But
due to his inexperience in college, he had to sit for a while behind Jimmy Garoppolo, and when he finally got the opportunity to be the starter, he got hurt, and somebody behind him did better. And whether you think it's fair or not, the team feels pretty prepared to move on with the guy that helped guide them almost all the way to the Super Bowl in Brock Purdy. At this point in time, it doesn't really matter that Trey Lance was the 3rd overall pick in that draft. By arguing for him through that lens, you're falling victim to what is called the sunk cost fallacy. Essentially, this describes a situation in which someone or something is reluctant to move on from an item or a belief because they've invested super heavily into it, even though the smartest thing to do is probably just to move on. For example, so what if you sank $500,000 into opening your boutique dog collar shop on Etsy? If you're selling like 4 of them every single year, there's no reason to keep going. It's a complete waste of your time. Now, that's not to say that Lance doesn't have an opportunity to win the job here, but if you're just going to yell at people over the fact that he was a really high draft pick, you're not really helping yourself. But on the flip side, Brock Purdy goofed up his elbow pretty good in that game, and it took a while for him to have surgery. We don't exactly know what he's going to look like once he's able to rejoin practice. If everything that Lance did during this offseason, working out with Patrick Mahomes and all of that, ends up going really well, he could just win the job outright for himself. At that point, it wouldn't matter what GM John Lynch had to say earlier in the offseason. It wouldn't matter how much the teammates like Brock Purdy, because they would have grown accustomed to working with a new and improved Trey Lance, who is finally starting to reach his potential in this scenario. Ultimately, what matters here is the fact that both of these quarterbacks are super cheap in Dynasty right now. You don't have to pick a side. You don't have to be right. It's not about being right. It's about having your opportunity to be right. And according to DLF's May startup ADP, Trey Lance is going as the QB 22 right now, and Purdy is going as the QB 27. For fantasy football managers, the answer between Lance versus Purdy
is both.
So if you're pretty adamantly pro Lance or pro Purdy and spending a lot of time talking to people about it, just drop your ego and understand it doesn't matter. Like I was talking about earlier, anybody that gets to play with CMC, Ayuk, Debo, Kittle, they're going to kill it. So go out and send some offers in your leagues today. Thanks for joining me in this vibe session. If you liked what you saw, be sure to hit that subscribe button and give us a like. Check out all of our other videos too. We have so many cool things here to offer you at Draft Sharks. And don't forget, check out the website, www.draftsharks.com. Adios!